on the CBS-2 Information Network. This is a Campaign 2000 update.
Good evening. I'm Stephen Clark.
And I'm Dana Tyler. We will be bringing you updates on local races and the presidential race every half hour for the rest of the evening.
Voters, of course, here in New York are still casting their ballots at polling booths all across the area, including, take a look at a live picture from PS 111. This is a school on the west side where people have been lining up, as have many New Yorkers today.
A lot of people waiting for hours. The polls have not closed yet. We don't have firm numbers for you yet, but we do have exit poll information, which gives us a good idea of how people voted today. CBS 2 political correspondent Marcia Cramer is here to take us through some of the results, some of the things we've learned so far. Marcia?
Well, Dana, exit polls are giving some indication of why people are voting the way they are. They show, for example, that Rick Lazio was never able to make his case that there was a positive reason to vote for him. Asked if they were voting for or against the candidate, 68%, more than 2 out of every 3 people who voted for Rick Lazio, said they were actually voting against Hillary Clinton. In comparison, only 30% of the people who voted for Hillary said they were doing so because they didn't like Lazio. On the religion issue, Hillary Clinton got 58% of the Jewish vote, 41% to Lazio. She took 48% of the Catholic vote. He beat her with 52%. And then on the Protestant vote, again, Hillary Clinton beat him by a little bit, 52% to 47%. Joining me now is Hank Scheinkoff, a political consultant. Let's try to figure out what all this means. What does this mean in terms of the campaign that she ran versus the campaign that he ran?
What it tells you is that she had the issues and he had one issue. She was talking about education, health care reform, Social Security, things that mattered to New Yorkers, and he was talking about Hillary Clinton. He had one issue, she had 3 issues, and issues triumphed over the negatives against her. It didn't work.
Well, let me ask you another question. In the waning days of the campaign, what they were able to do was, because there was this soft money question, she had a lot of money to spend, and she started circulating circulars that went to a lot of different people. There's one that I have here that had a picture of Rick Lazio with Yasser Arafat. Another one compared Rick Lazio to Newt Gingrich. How difficult, how hard was this in terms of the attack it made on Rick Lazio in the last days of the campaign that made people, you know, vote for or against him?
This kind of high-impact, quality direct mail tends to work when it's reinforced constantly over shorter spans of time. For example, you'll get 3 or 4 pieces over 3 or 4 days, or you may get 5 pieces over 3 or 4 days, giving you negative information about the opponent. What's interesting about the Arafat photo, we know, is that the president was in it, he's no longer in it. But it works because it reinforces the negatives that have already been established.
But how did that work in terms of the Jewish vote? I mean, he attacked her day after day for taking money from Muslim extremist groups, yet the Jews ended up going for her.
Well, but that's an interesting dynamic, Marcia. In 1986 and in 1992, Al D'Amato won the Jewish vote, took that same percentage of the Jewish vote as we project that Rick Lazio will be taking, about 40% and better. Same number. So, in fact, the impact was de minimis.
Okay, there's also another interesting thing here. Even before the polls closed, the Republicans were going after and pointing fingers, actually, I should say, at what was going on. Governor Pataki's wife, Libby, appeared on an Albany radio station, WROW, and blasted Mayor Rudy Giuliani for hurting Lazio's chances. She said, quote, Giuliani was jerking people around and not getting out of the race soon enough. I wonder why now? Why the finger pointing?
The Republicans don't like to lose. They've had a bad couple of years. In 1998,
but the polls aren't even closed.
But hold on. In 1998, the Republicans lost the Attorney General's race. They shouldn't have lost that. They're not having. They lost the Senate race. Al D'Amato went down, and now they've lost the 3rd one in a row, a big one. This is a tough one for George Pataki to lose. His prestige was on the line. Lazio was his candidate.
Okay, that's all the time we have for this part of it. Stephen and Dana.
Marcia, thank you.
We just got exit polling information from Virginia that Governor Bush has now taken that state. Again, exit polling information from Virginia, where the polls actually have been closed now for a little more than half an hour, but it took a little while longer on this one because it was very close.
CBS News reporting that. Don't forget, the polls are still open until 8 o'clock in New Jersey and Connecticut, until 9 o'clock here in New York. Keep it right here on CBS 2. We'll be updating you throughout the evening, every half hour, then live team coverage at 11.
Election coverage on CBS-2 is brought to you by TheStreet.com.
now. It's 9 o'clock straight up. The polls now closed in the state of New York, and CBS2 now is ready to declare winners in the Senate race. The First Lady, Hillary Rodham Clinton, is the projected winner against Rick Lazio, the congressman from Long Island, with 1% of the precincts reporting. Mrs. Clinton has 88% of the vote. Rick Lazio, 12%.
So again, that is the projected winner, Hillary Clinton in New York. Of course, we'll be following the results as they come in. We're at 1% of the precincts reporting. We will see where they go. And as you see, also Al Gore leading George W. Bush and is declared a winner, 83 to 17%, with that same 1%. Again, CBS2 is projecting Al Gore the winner of the race here in New York. We will be back with more election coverage in about 20.
Dan, the vice president is asleep. He's trying to catch up on, I guess he was up for 50 hours before he finally decided to go down for the night. But his team is still up, and they'll be out talking about this in probably the next 10 minutes or so. And I'll tell you, Dan, when you go back and you look at how this evolved, I mean, you couldn't write a movie script that anybody would believe based around this. About 1:30 this morning, based on projections that Mr. Gore was going to lose Florida by about 50,000 votes, he picked up the telephone and he called the Texas governor and said, "I'm conceding the election to you. Congratulations, Governor. I'll soon make it public." And on his way down here to War Memorial Plaza, his field director called one of his aides and said it's not a margin of 50,000 votes. It's more like 60,000 votes. Well, this poor fellow wasn't about to tell the vice president, so he called the campaign chairman, Bill Daley, who then told the vice president, wait a minute, we better hold off on all of this. By the time they got down here, where they were supposed to give the concession speech in front of the crowd, the margin had narrowed to about 1,000 votes. So Bill Daley got on the phone to Don Evans, his opposite number at the Bush campaign, and said, we're not going to concede just yet. And then Mr. Gore made a phone call about a half an hour later and said, I'm taking it back. And that's where we are now, Dan.
John Robertson, in case anybody's asking, the fact that Vice President Gore called George Bush and said, well, I'm going to concede to you, that's not a binding contract of any kind. The Bush people, of course, were stunned when he called back and said, listen, it's gotten down so close, so quickly in Florida, I'm just not going to make any public announcement. That's pretty much where we are right now. Quick recap, 260 Electoral College votes for Gore, 246 for Bush. It takes 270 to win. Oregon's 7 electoral votes are undecided, but it turns out they won't matter in the final analysis because neither man can win now without Florida. Bush's lead in Florida is about 1/30th of 1%. That's the difference between the two of them in Florida, but Bush does still lead in Florida. If that lead survives a recount, as the Bush people think it will, then Bush will win the Electoral College vote. Dan Rather, stay with us now. The early show follows on right behind us.
From the CBS2 Information Network, this is a Campaign 2000 update.
Good morning on this Wednesday, November 8th, the day after Election Day. Still no new president, but we do have some local winners. I'm Michael Pomeranz.
And I'm Cindy Hsu. It is 6:55. Here are the results of some of the top races.
Well, unlike the presidential race that we've been hearing about all night, the battle for New York Senate was decided surprisingly early, with the First Lady beating Republican Rick Lazio. Emily Francis live in Chappaqua. She joins us now with more. Good morning, Emily.
Well, good morning, Michael and Cindy. As the drama continues in the presidential race, the New York Senate seat is now sealed. Al Gore and George W. Bush are still in limbo waiting for that Florida recount, while Hillary Clinton is now waking up victorious. Now, Clinton clinched the Senate seat of outgoing Senator Patrick Moynihan only hours after the polls closed, and she's even made history, becoming the First Lady to win an elected office. And it looks like the First family will now be calling the beautiful town of Chappaqua home for at least the next 6 years. Now take a look at the results of the race. It was not as close as the polls had predicted. Hillary garnered 55% of the vote. Rick Lazio garnered 43% of the vote. Now, last night, a beaming and emotional President Clinton stayed in the background at a victory party for Hillary. Hillary, as well as Chelsea, Senator Schumer, and outgoing Senator Moynihan, among others, stood in front of a jam-packed house at the Grand Hyatt in the Grand Hyatt in Manhattan as confetti rained down upon them. The First Lady / Senator-elect spoke to supporters for about 10 minutes, and she basically thanked them for voting on the issues rather than where she is from. She also promised to fight hard on issues like the women's right to choose, health care, education, and Social Security. She promised to prove that she could be trusted to fill Moynihan's shoes with honor and integrity, and she said that she'd even be willing to reach beyond party lines to bring progress to New York families.
I am profoundly grateful to all of you for giving me the chance to serve you.
You know what she did? She stuck to the issues. She talked about what mattered to New Yorkers.
Thank you for opening up your minds and your hearts, for seeing the possibility of what we could do together for our children and for our future here in this state. Today we voted as Democrats and Republicans. Tomorrow we begin again as New Yorkers.
Hillary said that she called Rick Lazio last night to congratulate him on a hard-fought race and to thank him for his service to his district. Lazio said last night during a speech that now we must stand together as New Yorkers, and he compared himself to the Mets, saying that, well, we can place. Meanwhile, there's no word if Hillary Clinton will be coming up to her home in Chappaqua to speak later this morning, but we will, of course, bring that to you should that happen. For now, reporting live from Chappaqua, I'm Emily Francis, CBS 2.
Emily, thank you. And as expected, it was a real squeaker in the race for the U.S. Senate in New Jersey. Democrat John Corzine won the election by just about 80,000 votes over his Republican rival, Bob Frank. Corzine spent more than $60 million during his campaign, prompting much criticism from the Republican Party. In his concession speech, Frank said he was outspent 10-1.
Time now for a look at traffic and weather together, and we start with Carrie Lee. Carrie.
Well, Michael, right now, if you're headed into town at the Hudson River crossings, Lincoln, it's about a half an hour. Holland and George Washington Bridge, about 15. Flying out of LaGuardia, you'll have about a 45-minute delay, so it's a good idea to call ahead and find out what's going on. Back to you two. Here's what's going on.
All right, Carrie, thanks very much. Should be partly cloudy today, high of about 61 degrees.
Okay, decent day. We're going to be back in a half hour with much more Election Day reaction.
Now back to the early show.
Once there was a boy who flipped burgers. He had nothing, but wanted it all. So he went to college, got a degree, built a life for himself. And one day, he bought his very own burger restaurant. Then he invested everything in a certain tech stock without checking TheStreet.com first. Once there was a middle-aged man who flipped burgers. He had nothing, but wanted it all. TheStreet.com. Ignore us at your own risk.
Coming up on the next ET.
Bet? Oprah.
Oprah's phone call to Bet. We'll tell you what was said during their private call. Then the latest news on Harrison Ford's separation from his wife of 17 years and the rumors that link him to Lara Flynn Boyle. Plus, we go behind the scenes of Danny's hard drive to see why this adult site gets 13 million hits a day. And who's the long-haired brunette Tom Cruise is kissing in New York? We've got the pictures from the set next ET.
Tonight at 7 on CBS 2. How a few local cops became national heroes. Thursday on the news at 11.
Well, a wild election night has resulted in an historic presidential race that is still too close to call.
With roughly 1,800 votes separating Gore and Bush in Florida, a recount is already underway.
And it's early as Wednesday morning, the 8th of November, 2000. And good morning. Welcome to the early show on this Wednesday morning here with Jane Clayson. I'm Bryant Gumbel, and it doesn't quite rate with Dewey defeats Truman, but you get the idea.
Well, a lot of Americans went to bed last night thinking that that was the case.
Well, it's certainly not the case.
And then things changed.
This is really of historic proportions, Jane. What we have here is what they said in the movie